Good morning, students. I, myself, Dr. V B Kadam, Associate Professor, Department of Botany, KTHM College, Nasik. Students, today we are going to learn the chapter Photosynthesis, and topic is Pigment System first and Pigment System second, its composition, light harvesting mechanism, and functioning of pigment system first and pigment system second. That means the initial stage of photosynthesis. Mechanism of photosynthesis. The light dependent and light independent reactions are two successive reactions that occurs during photosynthesis. Students, you know the definition of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis means synthesis of food materials by the green cells of plants in presence of sunlight with the help of CO2 and water is known as photosynthesis. Now students, the complete process of photosynthesis or complete mechanism of photosynthesis is divided into two parts. One is known as light dependent reactions and second part is known as light independent reactions. Light dependent reactions is also known as Hale's reactions. Now why it is called light dependent reactions? Because light is important for the process of these light dependent reactions. Now in light dependent reactions, ATP and NADPH are synthesized during the light dependent phase of photosynthesis, and in light independent reaction, what happens? The synthesized ATPs and NADP are utilized for the conversion of carbon dioxide to glucose occurs in light independent phase of photosynthesis. Students, look at this picture. This is the chloroplast, outer membrane, inner membrane. This is the structure of grana. Thylakoids contain number of thylakoids. Now in grana section of chloroplast, light absorbed by antenna complex, transfer towards the core complex, and excitation of electron molecules. That means taking solar energy of electron molecules present in chlorophyll, and side by side oxidation of water molecules. The scientist Van Nil in 1941 find out the process of oxidation of water molecules during pigment system second. Now this breakdown of water molecules releases of oxygen and some protons. Now during light dependent reactions, synthesis of ATP and NADPH. That means during light phase of photosynthesis, a number of ATP and NADPH molecules are synthesized in presence of light, that means during daytime. And now these synthesized ATP and NADPH are utilized for the conversion of atmospheric CO2 to carbohydrates, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. That means the various kinds of sugars. Now this carbon dioxide enter into the leaf from atmosphere through open stomata. During light phase of photosynthesis, ATPs are synthesized, and in stroma portion of chloroplast, the dark phase or light independent phase occurs. Now what happens in light independent phase? The atmospheric CO2 enter into the leaf and it is converted into glucose by the utilization of ATP and NADPH, which is synthesized during the light phase of photosynthesis. The two stages of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes place in two stages: light dependent reactions and the Kelvin cycle, that means light independent reactions. Light dependent reactions which take place in the thylakoid membrane use light energy to make ATP and NADPH2. The Kelvin cycle which take place in the stroma portion of chloroplast uses energy derived from these compounds to make Ga3p from carbon dioxide. Photosystems. The process that convert light energy into chemical energy takes place in a multi-protein complex called a photosystem. Two types of photosystems are embedded in the thylakoid membrane of chloroplast, which are photosynthesis second and photosystem first. Each photosystem plays a key role in capturing the energy from sunlight by exciting electrons. These energized electrons are transported by energy carrier molecules which power the light independent reactions. Photosystems consist of a light harvesting complex and a reaction center. Pigments in the light harvesting complex pass light energy to two special chlorophyll A molecules in the reaction center. The light excites an electron from the chlorophyll A pair, which passes to the primary electron acceptor. The excited electron must then be replaced. In photosystem second, the electron comes from the splitting of water, that means oxidation of water molecules or bifurcation of water molecules, which releases oxygen as a waste product. In photosystem first, the electron comes from the chloroplast electron transport chain. The two photosystems oxidize different sources of the low energy electron supply, deliver their energized electrons to different places, and respond to different wavelengths of light. Students, look at this picture. Photosystem second, its reaction center is 680. That means they absorb 680 nanometer of light from the visible spectrum of light. And now the visible spectrum having 380 to 780 nanometer of light. This is the structure of thylakoid membrane. And now photosystem first, P700. That means they absorb only 700 nanometer of light from visible spectrum of light. What happens during photosystem second? The antenna complex absorbs the light, 680 nanometer of light. Absorbed light transferred towards the core complex, and now this core complex decide one chlorophyll molecules to hand over this absorbed radiant energy or solar energy to the one electrons out of two electrons present outer orbit of each and every chlorophyll molecules. And now these electrons moves from primary electron acceptors, and it is also known as excitation of electron molecules. Now what happens side by side? The water molecules are oxidized or break down into protons and electrons. Oxygen is released during the breakdown of water molecules, and now these electrons coming from breakdown of water molecules enter into the process of photosynthesis. Now breakdown of water molecules occurs during photosystem second, not in photosystem first. Now in photosystem first, the light harvesting complexes absorb 700 nanometer of light. Then absorbed light energy transferred towards the core complex. Core complex is made up of proteins. It is present in chlorophyll. And now this absorbed energy transferred towards the chlorophyll molecules. And now each and every chlorophyll molecules having outer orbits, two electrons. Both electrons are moving in opposite direction. One electrons taking this absorbed radiant energy or solar energy, and it moves from ground level to excitation. Excitation means taking solar energy with us. Introduction to light energy. All electromagnetic radiation or light energy travels at a particular wavelength and carries a certain amount of energy. What is light energy? The sun emits an enormous amount of electromagnetic radiation, solar or light energy. Humans can see only a fraction of this energy, which is referred to as visible light. The manner in which solar energy travels is described as waves. Scientists can determine the amount of energy of a wave by measuring its wavelengths, the distance between consecutive points of a wave, such as from crest to crest or from throat to throat. See, this is the picture of wavelength of energy. This is the crest, and this is the distance between two crests. Scientists measure the distance between two crests, that means the wavelength of energy. Visible light constitutes only one of many types of electromagnetic radiation emitted from the Sun and other stars. The electromagnetic spectrum is the range of all possible frequencies of radiation. The electromagnetic spectrum shows several types of electromagnetic radiation originating from the Sun, including X-rays and ultraviolet rays. The higher energy waves can penetrate tissues and damage cells and DNA, which explains why both X-rays and ultraviolet rays can be harmful to living organisms. Scientists differentiate the various types of radiant energy from the Sun within the electromagnetic spectrum. The difference between wavelength relates to the amount of energy carried by them. Each type of electromagnetic radiation travels at a particular wavelength. The longer the wavelength, the less energy is carried. Shorter, tight wavelengths carries the most energy. This may seem illogical, but think of it in terms of a person moving a heavy rope. It takes little efforts by a person to move a rope in long, wide waves. To make a rope move in short, tight waves, a person would need to apply significantly more energy. Students, look at this picture. This is the electromagnetic spectrum of light, and now this is the visible light. It contains violet, blue, green, yellow, orange and red colors. The nanometer of this wavelength is 380 to 780 nanometer of light, and now this light is useful for photosynthesis. Now this is the wavelength. If the wavelength is tight or short, they carries more energy, and the wavelength is long, they carries short energy. The Sun emits energy in the form of electromagnetic radiation. This radiation exists at different wavelengths, each of which has its own characteristic energy. All electromagnetic radiation, including visible light, is characterized by its wavelengths. Absorption of light. Pigments, that means photosynthetic pigments, chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, phycobilins, xanthophylls, phycoerythrins, phycocyanin, like chlorophylls and carotenoids, absorb and reflect light at a certain region of the electromagnetic spectrum. Light energy initiates the process of photosynthesis. When pigments absorb the light, organic pigments have a narrow range of energy levels that they can absorb. Energy levels lower than those represented by a red light are insufficient to raise an orbital electrons to an excited or quantum state. Energy levels higher than those in blue light will physically tear the molecules apart, a process called bleaching. For example, retinal pigments can only absorb 700 nanometer to 400 nanometer of light. This is visible light. For the same reasons, plants' pigments molecules absorb only light in the wavelength range of 700 nanometer to 400 nanometer of light. Plant physiologists refer to this range for plants as photosynthetically-active radiation. The visible light seen by humans as the color white light actually exists in a rainbow of colors in the electromagnetic spectrum, with violet and blue having shorter wavelengths, and thus they carries higher energy. At the other end of the spectrum, towards the red, the wavelengths are longer and have the lower energy. Understanding pigments. Different kinds of pigments exist, each of which has evolved to absorb only certain wavelength or colors of visible light. Pigments reflect or transmit the wavelengths they cannot absorb, making them appear in the corresponding color. Chlorophylls and carotenoids are the two major classes of photosynthetic pigments found in plants and algae. Each class has multiple types of pigments molecules. There are five major chlorophylls: chlorophyll A, B, C, and D, along with related molecules found in prokaryotes called bacteriochlorophyll. Students, look at this picture. This is the various colors present in visible light. Red color having the greater wavelength, that means naturally they carries the shorter wavelengths. Longer wavelength, they carries the short energy. Now orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet. Violet having the shorter wavelength, that means they carries the more energy. Now shorter wavelength carries more energy and longer wavelength carries less energy. See, this is less energy. The wavelength is more. It is in red, orange, yellow, green, and now the blue, indigo, and violet having the shorter wavelength, but they carries more energy. The color of visible light do not carry the same amount of energy. Violet has the shorter wavelength and therefore carries the most energy, whereas red has the longest wavelength and carries the least amount of energy. With dozens of different forms, carotenoids are a much larger group of pigments. The carotenoids found in fruits such as the red of tomato, lycopene, the yellow of corn seeds, zeaxanthin, or the orange of an orange peel, beta carotene, are used to attract seed dispersing organisms. It is also known as various pollinating agents. In photosynthesis, carotenoids functions as photosynthetic pigments that are very efficient molecules for the disposal of excess energy. When a leaf is exposed to full sun, the light dependent reactions are required to process an enormous amount of energy. If that energy is not handled properly, it can do significant damage. Therefore, many carotenoids are stored in the thylakoid membrane to absorb excess energy and simply release that energy as heat. Each type of pigment can be identified by the specific pattern of wavelengths it absorbs from visible light, which is the absorption spectrum. Chlorophyll A absorbs light in the blue-violet region, while chlorophyll B absorbs a red-blue light. Neither A or chlorophyll B absorb green light because green is reflected or transmitted. Chlorophyll appears green. Carotenoids absorb light in the blue-green and violet region and reflect the longer yellow, red and orange wavelengths. Many photosynthetic organisms have a mixture of pigments. In this way, organisms can absorb energy from a wider range of wavelengths. Not all photosynthetic organisms have full access to sunlight. See, this is the structure of various pigments: chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B and beta carotene. This is the absorption spectra. This is the wavelength on x-axis, absorption of light on b-axis. Now the chlorophyll A absorbs light in between 400 to 450 nanometer of light. Chlorophyll B absorbs 400 to 500 nanometer of light, and the beta carotene absorbs 350 to 550 nanometer of light. Chlorophyll A and B and carotene are hydrophobic organic pigments found in the thylakoid membrane. Chlorophyll A and B, which are identical except for the part indicated in the red box, are responsible for the green color of leaves. Beta carotene is responsible for the orange color in carrots. Each pigment has a unique absorption spectrum. Some organisms grow underwater where light intensity and quality decrease and change with depth. Other organisms grow in competition for light. Plants on the rainforest floor must be able to absorb any light that comes through because the taller trees absorb most of the sunlight and scatter the remaining solar radiation. When studying a photosynthetic organism, scientists can determine the type of pigments present by using a spectrophotometer. This instrument can differentiate which wavelength of light a substance can absorb. Spectrophotometers measures transmitted light and compute its absorption. By extracting pigments from leaves and placing these samples into a spectrophotometer, scientists can identify which wavelength of light an organism can absorb. Thank you.